two cars pulled up. I don't know, maybe some of the McDonough boys were in the cars, but they pulled up to the house, and the time I run inside to see what was going on, here's my dad with the wood poker, piece of flat steel with a curve to it, and he's showing people how the Carl D. Bradley broke in half. So I started learning about Carl D. Bradley, and then I never did meet Frank Mays or didn't know anything that he was still alive. And then this winter when I was in Florida, I found out about him through Cheryl and Hunter. And anyway, I stopped and seen Frank and asked him if he would come up to Beaver Island, so he's here. And I've heard his story probably 20 times, and I'm just waiting to hear it again. I never get tired of listening to it. So, thank you, sir.
Well, I'm sure a lot of you senior citizens can go back to 1958. I know I can. I was 26 years old at the time, so that calculates me out to being 82 now. But everything that happened that night is burned in my mind, and I remember it all. And I will tell you some of it, and then I want questions. You got any questions? That will take me into something else that I may have forgot to explain to you. But we had left Rogers City, Michigan with a load of limestone going to Gary, Indiana. And that was to be our last trip of the year, because we were to go to Manitowoc, Wisconsin to get a new cargo hold installed. So we unloaded in Gary, and we left Gary at 9:30 at night, and 2:30 the next afternoon we were doing Manitowoc, Wisconsin. So I was on a 4 to 8 watch, and the next morning I got up at 3:30, I went back after, as we do, for coffee and take a look at the pilot house, and I saw the Wisconsin shoreline lights, so fine. I went into the galley, and he said, oh, 2:30, we're tied up Manitowoc, great. I got off watch at 8 o'clock, went to my room and slept and did other things. In the afternoon, I went down the deck about 3 o'clock, and I couldn't see the shoreline. So back in the galley, he said, oh, we're not going, we're going back to Calcite for another load. So we thought nothing about it. Then you start calculating the time when it calcites, whether you're on watch or off watch. So this is sometime in the afternoon, and it was roughly about 3 o'clock, and at 3:30 I took coffee up to the pilot house. And the first mate and the captain were up there, and they told me, go back aft, check the coal bunkers, make sure they're pinned and clamped, because we're going to get into some heavy seas. Now this wind was building up way down in the southwest, down in the Plains states, coming up up into Lake Michigan. So I went back after I walked down the port side of the deck. It was moving, but you're used to that. So I went up, checked the coal bunker. Then I went down into the engine room, talked to the engineers, and from there there's a stoker room where the stoker man is, and I went down there, and from there you go into the tunnel underneath the cargo hold. And my job was to go down and sump out any water because our ballast tanks were leaking. Now, the ship holds 18,000 ton of cargo, so we had 12,000 tons of ballast aboard. That's all all she could hold. And they were leaking into the tunnel, so you sunk the tunnel out. When I took my time walking up the tunnel, you could look and you could see her bend and twist and turn. Paid no attention to it. You could hear a few rivets popping because she was doing that. When I got up into the dunnage room, I sat down with the deckhand, and all of a sudden there was a big slam, and she started to shake. And then another slam, and the ship started to shake. We got up and raced and looked on the port side, looking at the stack, and it wasn't there. And then it came up, and then it went down. So we turned around to our left, we had it going about 12 feet to our room, got our life jackets. We came out, we looked down the port side, and we saw we couldn't make it. We went to the starboard side, we said, we can't make it, there's 2 lifeboats back aft and a life raft up there. And I said life raft, so we went up on the pilot house deck. And more people were getting up there all the time. And I remember the second mate talking to the captain, that just prior to that, the first mate was on the radio phone with his Mayday message given out. He said, Mayday, 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 this is Carl D. Bradley. We're 12 miles southwest of Gull Island. We're breaking into and sinking. Anybody in the area, come to our aid. And he stayed on that until we actually separated, because he had no more power left. And the captain told the second mate, apparently to go back and launch the lifeboats, because I seen him running down the port side, and we were tearing apart. You could see the cables parting, blue and red flames shooting down there, and I seen him jump in the air. Well, his body was never recovered. Probably never made it. And then Elmer said, someone get the life raft ready, because we were listening to the port side, so I jumped on the life raft, which was midship. And the other men were starting to go to the starboard side, which was the high side, so if they got thrown, they'd get thrown the farthest. And Elmer said all the life jackets from the pilot house were distributed. He had to go 2 decks below to his room to get his jacket, and he said the main deck was already awash, and we were now in 2 pieces. And all of a sudden, the wave come and took us. And I was on the raft, I went down into the water, I come up out of the water, and with one arm, like you're gonna swim, and I hit the life raft. Now the bow is gone, the stern is still out there floating. So the first person was Elmer Fleming, the first mate. I helped him aboard, and we helped 2 other men. And 4 of us were on the raft watching the stern float even keel, lights on, then it tipped, wheel up, and went straight down. When the after cabins where the boiler area is, that hit the water and it exploded in a red ball of flame. And still the lights were on, and then it disappeared and everything went dark. And that was it. So then, you know, Elmer Fleming, he was the first mate, and so he took charge and kind of got us orientated. We knew our situation, we knew how bad it was. And there's a compartment on this life raft, because the life raft was 2 long steel tanks and 2 platforms. Either side would be the right side if you tipped over. And the deck of the life raft was slats with openings where we stuck our fingers into to hang on with. Well, he got down in the compartment, and there were 3 flares, so he took them out, and he lit one, and then he lit another, because he knew the Christian Satori, a German ship, was on its way to Chicago. He knew it was out there somewhere, but she was fighting the wind and the seas trying to get to us, so it took her a long time. So on the life raft, we were in 40-foot waves, and we would go up those waves up to the top, and the raft would actually tip over, and we'd all fall off.
No.
And the raft stayed down in the troughs. We were able to get back on until the 3rd time we couldn't get the 4th man aboard the raft. This man, I remember, he was dressed in a sweatshirt, khaki pants, and socks, and a life jacket. That's all he had. Now, our life jackets were a vest made out of canvas with cork. That's all it was. Did not have a collar, didn't have a crotch strap on it, and if it came up, the cork would hit you in the face. So, as time was going on, and Elmer told us about the Christian Satori out there, well, we kind of settled down at this time, but this is before we started tipping over. He says, I see some running lights, and we did. We saw the red and green light and the mast light of the Christian Satori coming to us. So Elmer waited, he took the last flare out of his jacket, he tried to light it, and it would not ignite. Then we saw her red light disappear, and we saw more of her green light, because, you know, they're at an angle, they call it 2 points abaft the beam, because you only be a certain point, so we know which way the ship was turning. And we saw her actually turn away from us. And then we started riding out the night, then we started tipping over. And eventually, I got back into the compartment, and I pulled out the sea anchor, and I tied that on. Then we would start going up these waves, the raft would shake, and then we would go through the waves and back down the other side, because that created a drag. And we went down at 5:30 at night, and we were found at 8:30 the next morning. And who found us, I'll give you a quick story, was the cook. He was 20 years old, and before we left Charleroi, the son who was laid up at they had to have a certain percentage of crew in order to come out to get us. So they needed a corpsman, a cook, and an engineer, and a few others. Well, I talked to the captain, the son, who later on in years, several times, and he said when they took her out, they rolled 55 degrees. And he said stuff was coming all off, the food was coming out of the cabinets, water got through the pilot house back in the area where the main radio was, and that knocked that out. The engineer complained, he said water's coming over the bow, getting into the stack, and couldn't kill his engines. And slowly, as time was going on, he got the crew settled down, and he called the cook up. It was getting daylight. He called him up on the bridge. Now, in October of '08, November is the 50th anniversary. In October of '08, I went to a Walmart supermarket in Zephyrhills, Florida, and we parked alongside this Michigan car. So my wife knows it. She said, "Oh, Michigan, where are you from?" The guy said, "Charleroi." She said, "Well, my husband used to live in Charleroi," which I did. I had a farm when I worked for Medusa Cement. I said, "What's his name?" She said, "Frank Mays." Was that the guy in Bradley? She said, "Yeah." So later she comes over and she said, "You know this fella?" I said, "No, I never met him. Now this is 50 years later." And it was Dick Sellison, the cook, who first spotted us. And how he did on the bridge, he said he told the captain, "I see something on the horizon." And the captain looked to his binoculars and said, "Could be some deer hunters going back to the mainland." He said, "No, sir." He said, "It's too flat. It can't be a boat." And he looked again, and it was Elmer and I. So what they did, now the seas are still going up and down, and we didn't realize this, that we couldn't move. Because we found out later that our bodies were shutting down, and your body was kept warm in here, in your extremities, nothing. We couldn't move our arms and legs, and we didn't realize this, because the sun blew when it spotted us. It came up broadside, kind of blocked the seas, we're going up and down, and these sailors are buoy jumpers, so they would jump on. At first they threw us a rope, but we couldn't grab the rope, we didn't know we couldn't move. So they jump on, and as the raft and the sundew got even, they grabbed us and picked us up and just threw aboard, one at a time. But prior to that, now, there was 4 in the raft. Well, the one guy, the third time it tipped over, we couldn't get him back aboard. He was wore out, we were wore out. So another fella and I, Gary Streletsky, we took an arm, we put it between our legs, we held on to it. And he had a life jacket on, he's the man with the sweatshirt and the khaki pants. Finally, as time went by, we looked and his head was underwater. And I picked him up by the hair and I looked, and so I just saw the white of it, just a splint. So I looked at Gary, he looked at me, and we released him. His body was never found. And I talked to a few doctors about that, and they assured me he was already dead from hypothermia. And just as it was breaking day, Gary got the strength, and he started foaming at the mouth, and he crawled off of the raft and started swimming away. Now the ship, the Trans-Ontario, picked him up and radioed back. We got a man off to Bradley, he has a jacket on, he said he has a breath of life left in him. So a doctor from Beaver Island, an elderly doctor, volunteered to go on a helicopter. He did start out, but then they called back and said Gary had passed away. So then we found Elmer and I. So that's briefly the story. Now I will answer any questions you have if there's something I could have missed. Yes?
Can you describe the submarine trip down later when you were vindicated?
That was in 1995. I got with a group that asked me if I wanted to go out and see the Bradley in a 2-person submarine. Oh, it was a short submarine. You laid on your belly. The pilot sat on a little stool and you laid underneath him. And I went down to see it and I identified the name and the whole thing. But I only was in the stern section. I didn't see the bow. So in 1997, I went with a group again, the same type of people with a remote operated vehicle. And that vehicle was done in 24 hours, and we had all the monitors, all the tapes going, and we saw the 2 pieces. They're 120 feet apart. And the thing is, they're upright with a slight portless to them. So the Bradley didn't tip or anything. And the stern section, when she went wheel up, it must have went down and hit the bottom and just laid back, because you can walk underneath the rudder and the propeller. Same way with the bow, it must have wiggled down because you walk underneath the bow. Yes?
From the time you first started hearing rivets pop until you found yourself in the water, any idea about how long?
Well, it was moving, we kept moving. We heard the first thud, the second thud, we never stopped, we just kept looking and moving. So within 5 minutes, we were in the water. But the stern was still afloat yet.
Yeah.
But the bow was now gone, because the bow was completely open with all the mechanism, where the stern was open, a cargo hold, but then going in the engine room, there's a door that was dog tight, so that would be watertight. But we were completely open. And see, the waves were probably about 30 foot then, and we just got washed off, we got caught.
How long was it, Brad?
638 feet.
Had you been in 40-foot water before?
No. But I never thought of it, you just, it's the same thing, you know. And when I went down to see it, and even in 97, the boom was still in the saddle with its cables on it. You would think it would twist and fall off, but it never did. And I'm still a crew member. I've never been discharged because the captain signs your discharge, and as a captain's supposed to do, he didn't do it down with his ship. But anything else? Yes.
What time of the year was it, like what month?
November the 18th. we got caught on what they call the gales of November. Like in, we went down on 58, and Daniel J. Morrell went down to 66 in Lake Huron, and the Fitz went down to 75 in Whitefish Bay, the gales of November again. And they're treacherous, because on the Great Lakes, they have waves called the Three Sisters, and they come in threes, there's just one right after another. So you're either going through one, over one, it's just very bumpy, but they're not spread out. And another thing, that with the southwesterly wind pushing the water of Lake Michigan up towards the top of Lake Michigan, it couldn't get through the straits fast enough. So that built a water wall against us, and we had a wind pushing us, and we're going this water wall, and the Bradley just couldn't take her anymore. She just snapped right into it.
How old was the boat?
She was built in 27.
Okay.
Yeah, she was the queen of the lakes for many, many years until the Fitz came out. And she was the biggest and the fastest on the lakes. And she came, but the Fitz came out in 58 also. Yes.
Did they predict the severity of the storm?
Well, the mate and the captain knew about it, because during the storm, and during that night, they were looking for us. The Robert C. Stanley was behind Beaver Island, hooked, but there were two hooks down, and 20 RPMs on her props, so you wouldn't drag her hooks. And then she came out during the night after the Bradley had gone down, and it's kind of calmed down a little bit. And the captain made a remark like, "What the hell is the Bradley doing out there in the middle of the lake and weather like this?" And other ships are, on the Wisconsin shoreline waiting, and she was again Beaver Island waiting it out. But our captain decided he's going to make that haul at Cana Island on the Wisconsin shoreline, heading toward Lansing Shoal, and that's where we ended up.
Was there ever any investigation that there hadn't been proper maintenance on the boats, or
No.
was this a call?
No, they knew about this river deal because we would put boats in. And they knew, even the captain wrote a letter to his girlfriend in Port Huron saying, "The Bradley is very ripe, I'll be glad when they get her repaired." But he was known as like a heavy weather man, so the story goes. Because you see, the captain's salary at that time was $22,000 a year. And the more tonnage he hauled, the more trips he made, the more money he made. So that all goes into the equation too.
After your recovery, did you go back out to see
No.
and work on the freighters?
No, I wasn't allowed by the boss. But what had happened though, they told me I did not have to go back sailing, U.S. Steel did. Well, it comes 1959, they sent a diver down, a hard hat diver, to the Bradley, and he has supposedly photographed it in one piece. And I talked to this diver, and I got some documentary proof where he had met with a Mr. Smith, and Mr. Smith gave him like $30,000 to shut his mouth, to take these pictures. And that was kept quiet for a long time. And Bradley, or U.S. Steel kept saying that Bradley did not break in two, it hit something and sank. They denied it. Now, if you have a hard hat diver, you have to have a crew. You have to have a captain of a boat, so all of them must have got hush money for this. But as time went on, in 1959, the litigation started out, and I hired my own attorney, and he subpoenaed him for these pictures, and U.S. Steel did not know where the pictures were anymore. You see, they lost them, so that's where that's clear. So time passes to 1997, with the ROV, they taped everything on the bottom, and they published these, and now they have documentary proof. Because you see, U.S. Steel said in all of these hearings that Elmer Fleming and I were delusional, we didn't know what we saw, we didn't know anything, that the Bradley couldn't have broken through, but we seen it. And when they questioned us by the Coast Guard inquiry, we each were in a separate room talking to them, and our stories were a perfect match. But they still wouldn't believe it because U.S. Steel kept, "Oh no, that did not happen." It did. Yes?
There was an engineer by the name of Beamer, was his last name, do you
Alfred
remember him?
Beamer.
It's a friend of mine's father, that I remember him telling me went down on the Bradley. Do you remember him at all?
Alfred Beaver, very well, yes. And I knew his wife was Dolores Angieski. We always called her Angie. And she never remarried. I know her very well.
Yeah, his son was Phil.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
And there was one, a Wheels one, married this guy's sister, who was on the Bradley, so there was a son and a son-in-law both on the Bradley. Because people were pretty well related. I had a first cousin on the Bradley, and I had a second cousin on the Bradley, and they were both lost. Of course, out of the 35, we lost 33.
And they were from Alpena.
Well, Roger City,
Roger
Golden
City,
Area.
Alpena, yeah.
We had one man from St. Agnes, the second maid. We had a third maid from Kalkaska, Michigan, a deckhand from Iowa, some town in Iowa. He wandered into the Michigan area up in Roger City, and he got a job. City, he liked it, so he took his job. He was a single man, and then we had the captain. He was originally from Canada, but out of Ohio. And the chief engineer, he was from Ohio somewhere. But mainly everybody was from a given area. Yes,
Was the one from Kalkaska, Carl Bartel?
yes, Carl Bartel, yeah. Yes.
Hi,
You miss
Frank.
going to sea?
Yes, I heard that.
You miss going to sea?
No. Yes.
Hi, Frank. I taught in Rogers City actually for years, and so your name is very familiar. It's nice to actually put a voice and a face to it. Was the fourth person on the life raft, was that Dennis Meredith?
Dennis Meredith.
Was it? Okay.
Yes.
I had
That was the
his,
person we had to let go.
yeah, I had his
Yes.
descendants, so I was wondering if I was thinking correctly that it was Dennis.
Yeah, years pass, and I don't remember the year. It could have been the year 2000 or something. I got acquainted with the people I wrote my book with, and with Dennis Hale, who survived the sinking with Daniel J. Morrell, he knew some people of U.S. Steel, so he arranged for 6 of us to go up to the Sioux to take a trip on a Roger Blau. So we went up there, we got on Roger Blau, we went up to 2 harbors, we rode to Taconite, taking it down to Gary. And the captain and the first mate knew of my background. We got talking, we were up in a pilot house. And I did some wheeling on the ship, so as we come out of the St. Mary's River and heading towards the bridge, the first mate asked me, he said, "Frank, you want to take the wheel and take her over the bridge?" I said, "Sure." So he lined me up, and we were going, and I leaned back and I said, "You guys see that buoy back there?" I said, "That's where the Cedarville is." And then I said, "You know, in October, I was on the Cedarville, and I got put on the Bradley." And the captain said, "You're getting off at the next port."
Did former Attorney General Frank Kelly, did he do the representing of people?
No, the one that we represented most was Vic Hansen. He kind of got as many widows as he could under his wing. And U.S. Steel, when we was in Cleveland and their attorneys was Roman Keenan. I remember that. He said, "You and Elmer are not going to get anything because you survived." So, all the money was to go to the widow because all the value was of the ship and the cargo. We had no cargo. But prior to that, Gary Streletsky's dad knew an attorney in Rogers City who knew a marine attorney in Detroit. So I got together with him in Rogers City and got talking. So we were in Cleveland for all these hearings, and they told me I wouldn't get anything. I talked to this attorney, his name was Ken Davies, and Ken says, "Okay." He says, "What hotel are you staying at?" And I told him. He said, "I'll send a cab over for you." He did. He called me down, I got in a cab, we went to a restaurant, sat in the corner, and made the agreement that he would represent me. So we come back next morning, continued the hearings, and he announced Frank made his representative, and U.S. Steel didn't like that. See, Elmer stayed with them, and Elmer got promoted to become a captain, and he didn't go back sailing. I didn't. So they told me, "We're going to put you in the storeroom, shuffling paper, you don't have to go back." So all of 1957, I was in the storeroom until the end of December. They came down and said, "If you want to work for U.S. Steel, you got to go back sailing." That's the bitter part. So I found a job. I didn't quit. I just didn't go back to work. I just went something to find a check. And the sweet part is I got a job at Medusa Cement in Charlotte, Michigan. And I must have been doing pretty good because they promoted me to office manager and shipped me to York, Pennsylvania plant. So I was office manager there, And then I knew the plant manager that, if you follow this, was in Charlevoix. He ends up down in Florida as the vice president. I knew him very well. He had a farm in Charlevoix, and I used to sell him beef and different things. So he called me one day, and he said, I need a purchasing agent in Florida. Well, gee, I had 5 women in the office in York, Pennsylvania. One didn't like me because she had more seniority than I did. She didn't want to take orders from a kid, I guess, at the time, so. I accepted that job. They moved me down to Florida, then I retired. And I liked it so much, we built a home and I stayed in Florida. And now that's my permanent home, but I still come up here for the summer months. Yes.
If you know, what difference did it make to U.S. Steel whether the boat broke or whether it hit something?
Well, probably denying that Bradley was in such a bad shape.
That it wasn't seaworthy?
It wasn't seaworthy.
And if it wasn't seaworthy, they had more liability?
Probably. Because see what happened in the month of October '58, we were up in Cedarville and we hit bottom. So we loaded with dolomite, come back to Kelsey and unload it. We put it in the slip, they pumped the stern in, put a Band-Aid on it, didn't report it to the Coast Guard, and away they went. That's a big violation, but they got away with it.
Do you have any post-traumatic stress?
No, no. For several years, it was a little tough because I was working for Brewski Lumber in Polson. That's where I got my job right after U.S. Steel told me I had to go back sailing. And some of the, like Dennis Meredith's parents came in and talked to me, and it was emotional. Wanted to know exactly what happened, and I told them. But as time goes on, now the emotion is gone. But I've never had a nightmare, I've never had a dream about it. Not a bit.
Frank, how long did it take you to recover after you got off the ship and they put you in, I think in Charlotte Hospital?
Charlotte Hospital, about a week, yeah.
And what did the doctor say? Did he say there was anything about your amazing physical condition that made you survive that when the other people didn't? Did he say anything?
Well, for one thing, I was well dressed. I had a fall weather jacket on and I had, heavier pants and shoes because I was on watch. And my age probably had something to do with it also.
You were
26.
26, so you were the youngest of the, there was just the 2 survivors?
Yeah, Elmer, I think, was 42 at the time. He was older, he was well dressed too because he was on watch also.
The doctor didn't think that you were some type of incredible specimen then from another planet, or something, you were just straight human?
No, but the way, Warren Toussaint was the corpsman on board the Sunday, so he was in contact with Dr. Lawrence Gray. And when they brought us aboard, they took our clothes off and they started just one man on each arm and leg going down your leg like this to get everything going, to get you warm, and they lined us with water bottles. And even before we hit shore, when Gary Shaletsky crawled off the raft and he picked us up, we told the captain of the Sundew, we feel good, we were conscious, and he kept warming us up. So Warren Toussaint and the doctor coordinated, and the doctor said, well, feed him some liquid, but nothing too solid there, just a little bit at a time going into that to get us going. And the captain told Warren, the corpsman, you're now in charge. If something develops on these guys, tell me immediately we're heading in, otherwise he was going to continue the search, which we encouraged him, probably find Gary if he could. Then our temperature started going up, so he called out the search, gave it to the Hollyhock, and he came in the Charlevoix. And they put us in hospital. And the doctor said that, Gary said, your condition gave you about another half hour. He said, that was about it, because we were starting to shut down internally. Because when they picked us up on a raft, we had a coating of ice on us, really, not a heavy coating, but there was ice, because of the water splashing and the wind.
Have you ever gone swimming in Lake Michigan since then?
Yeah. When I used to have a boat, and I went out of Charlevoix one day, and I don't know how deep the water was, about maybe 10 feet of water, and I spotted a rudder down there. An old wooden rudder, I remember. And I dove down and I hooked a chain on it, and with my boat, I had a 65 horse motor, and I was going to pull it to shore. And I lined up where it was, and I went back out with another guy in a bigger boat, but we couldn't find it. So, yeah, we used to go down to the beach in Charlevoix and go swimming. For a while until, then we go to Lake Charlevoix. Then, when I took this trip on a Roger Bluff, and then there's 2 friends of mine who became captains. One is on the Sinclair, American steamship. He invited me, and I found another guy, and we took a trip on that, a 6-day trip. And then another neighbor kid who grew up to become a captain, Ed Brady, he invited me on the Philip R. Clark. So I took a trip on the Philip R. Clark, but this is just a few years ago. Well, I'm not afraid to go back out there now because of the design of the ships and the way they are.
Well,
Did it have full ballast tank?
Yes, yeah, 12,000 tons of ballast.
I think it's wonderful that that feller that tried to swim lived to be rescued anyway.
Well, he didn't.
On the boat, he lived when he was alive when he got rescued, one of them.
No, no, he died. Oh yeah, he was picked up.
Right.
But he died
That's what I
on board
mean.
the Transitoria.
He
And there
lived
was
to be
a-
picked up.
A German ship, and they took his body off in Milwaukee, and they had it on the stretcher covered with an American flag. So,